Hi guys, welcome to my studio. Alright, so right now I'm mixing my green stuff, and then I'm gonna mix that with a little bit of super sculpty baking clay, and I'll show you about how much amount I use before start sculpting this turtle. My hands are a little cold because I was out, so my hands are still a little stiff, but we'll work it. Okay, so very roughly, I'm not measuring. Very roughly, like a 2-to-1, right? Less of the super sculpty, more of the green stuff, and just mix them together. This changes the properties of the clay. I don't want too much super sculpty because then it becomes different, like pasty. I don't want that. I want enough super sculpty that the clay becomes more spreadable, more blendable, and it does alter the curing time a little bit. It prolongs the curing time just a little bit, but clay is still sticky, and that's what I want. So I'm going to need this, and once this is ready, we'll spread it on the shell and start sculpting the shell of the turtle. All right, so now this armature is I still have to be very careful because it's still not it's not super thick wire, so want to be careful. And this step requires a little bit of pressing, okay? And if you haven't seen the little armature video, it was there yesterday. I posted it up. It's only like a 5-minute video. It's not really a how-to video. I will be making another video on making armatures for creatures like this, odd creatures. On another occasion. I do have, and of course it depends on how many people are really interested in watching that kind of stuff. I do have a video already from my previous sculptures on how I deal with certain odd armatures, right? How I build armatures for quadrupeds or armatures for skeletal turtles. The core concept to building an armature is pretty much consistent. What you change is the size, the shape, and there are slight variations. Like this armature still uses the humanoid armature techniques. It's still the same technique, except I'm adding an extra step, which is the carapace and the plastron on the turtle. So the upper shell and lower shell of the turtle, right? So it changes the mechanic a little bit, right? And definitely changes the shape. Makes things a little odd because this is an odd creature. All right, so now I'm shaping the shell, and this is the what I call the blobby stage of the sculpture. There's no, I don't think about detail. I don't think about anything but spreading that clay. Now I gotta get my water. So just give me a minute, guys. I'll be right back. It's very important to have water with resin clays, even if you're working with resin clay mixes like I do. It's important to have water. So the blobby stage is just, and it's blobby because I use little blobs. Now here in this stage I can use bigger pieces of clay, but as I start to hone in on the details, you're gonna see, for example, for these limbs, I start using very small amounts of clay, and the sculpture, I take my time. I will sculpt half of it today or a quarter of it today, whatever, however comfortable I feel. If I feel that, okay, that's enough detail, looks good, I'm gonna let it dry. And I let it dry and I come back to it tomorrow. These resin clays are remarkable. They will stick to anything. Even if it's dry, when you use a new batch of resin clay, it will stick to the dry clay. It really is wonderful stuff. So basically the way I look at it is I work on my project and then I press the save button. Just like you would on a computer, to save your work so you don't lose it. That's the thing, because I have this nasty habit of working and then I forget, and I worked for an hour or so on this detail, and all of a sudden I smush it with a finger. Oh, that's frustrating. So to avoid that, I just work on things very slowly. And really, that's when your work comes out its best. When you take your time, little by little. You got to be very patient with sculpting. That's for sure. All right. It's okay if it's a little lumpy. We're not working on a machine. So, you know, if this was a robot Ninja Turtle, then you want everything really smooth, right? So it's okay if it's a little lumpy. It's an organic piece. And this is an undead turtle. So who knows how long that shell has been on the ground, you know, or whatever. Turtle shells are pretty strong too. If you've ever seen the skeleton of a turtle, it's quite remarkable. All right, so again, I give it a little bit of smoothing. Check it out from the side. Now he's pretty flat. Turtle shells come in all varieties depending on the species. Some of them have flatter shells, right? Others have more. Here you want to have like a little hill, little lump, depending if it's a tortoise or a turtle. So what I'm doing now is I'm blending the clay. Now, here's an example. I used a little bit more green stuff in my mix here. You can see the different coloration. That it is important. I do everything almost by eye, right? So when I'm mixing the clays, I've gotten so used to the different mixes that rarely do I measure unless I'm trying like something new and I'm documenting it on my notebook. Then I write down like I used, you know, an inch of material or whatever, right? Something general like that just to give, you know, remind me if I'm making a new mixture recipe. But what I wanted to say was, without the Super Sculpey, this becomes a lot harder to blend. You can still do it, but it really becomes a lot harder to blend. So I am a firm proponent of the clay mix. Now, some people sculpt with green stuff purely, and I mean, there's no problem with that. You can still sculpt with it purely, and I do it depending on what I'm sculpting and the region. Sometimes I will start with a clay mix and end up with just pure green stuff, depending on the part of the creature that I'm sculpting. You know, if I'm doing horns and teeth, I'd rather use my pure green stuff, or I'll use Procreate, right? And I'll mix in some Procreate. We'll talk about that in some other video. Procreate is a clay that I'm eyeing for sculpting machines. Okay. All right. So I gave it a little bit of a shape, and I'm going to continue to shape this, and we'll be back when I've covered most of the shell. Okay, so I'm almost finished covering the carapace, right? And I am covering the entire armature, even the black filler clay that I put in yesterday. And yesterday's video was a 5-minute video. It really wasn't informative. It was just to kind of tell people, hey, this is what I'm working on this week, you know. And by the way, I get this clay on Amazon. This is a tape of green stuff, and it comes in a long tape. And it's about $16. This stuff is always expensive, but you get a long tape. It really lasts me a while. And as you can see, I use small amounts of it at a time. And that little bit of roll will probably do well for all these projects, you know. And I have more clay coming. I have a variety of different clays in the studio. I use quite a few different clays. Okay, now we're starting to see the shell. We're going to be working on the details very soon. And I'm going to switch over to that. Okay, and I'm kind of making a tank top here with the blobs. So the turtle has a tank top. But that's what I'm going to do, is then differentiate with my tools. Differentiate the plastron from the, that is the belly shell here, the plastron from the carapace. You know, I got to do a little bit of work to differentiate the two again. I want to cover all this armature in clay before I do anything else, and I need my water here. Okay, so right now I'm just smoothing, blending, you know, getting that armature covered, and then I start worrying about the details. Okay, getting my basic shapes. All right, so we're getting to the nitty-gritty now. And today I'm only going to work on the shell. I'm not going to do any of the bones. That's going to be a different video. I just want to get this covered and start differentiating my different shells. And then I can start doing the scutes on the turtle. And right now I'm just working with my fingers, no tooling yet. The blobby stage, that's usually what you do. Unless I need to get into a cramped area, then I use my tools. Right, so I'm trying to keep this in the camera so you guys see. So, all right, so smoothing. It's okay if it's a little bit lumpy. This is an organic piece. I'm going to keep this ridge line here on the side of the shell. I want to do like a little ridge line, okay? So I'm kind of smoothing that. The turtle shell's like a sandwich. So we'll see. All right. And my last piece of green stuff, I'm going to cover the last piece of armature, and then we'll start some details. Okay, so once I have my armature completely covered, I start working on my tools with my tools. And this is what I call the paddle tool. These were wax carving sets. They're excellent for sculpting. And I start slowly kind of smoothing the clay like this with the paddle tool. And then when I need to dig into it to make these shapes, I just dig into it with the paddle tool. The paddle tool is a little bit curved, so it gives you that nice shape for that. Now, for tight areas, like in between these wires, I use my bent tool and kind of gently smoothing things out. All right? And you'll find that no matter how many tools you'll have, you never have a tool for every single thing. So sometimes you have to make your own tools. So I like press it down a little bit gently and kind of use my fingers, kind of shape it. But basically when you're doing the lower shell, a turtle has this bridge situation going on here, right? And then right here, this is hollow space, especially in a skeleton. Now, I'm not going to do a hollow space because that would just weaken the model. So what I'll do next, let me just work a little bit on this. I have it a little bit squarish on the bottom here. That's the way I kind of want it. I'm just doing like a generalized shell. I'm giving it my own little flair. So I got to work on a little bit smoothing there before I start details. But ball tools are excellent, and you know, for doing concavities and, you know, hole. Now this might need a little bit more clay, but I'm just gonna press it just a little bit with the ball tool, right? Because those areas are gonna remain black in between the shell there. Now, if you want a deeper, much deeper concavity there, then when you do your armature, which is why the armature is key, when you do your armature, you do this with whatever filler material you're using. So I'm going to fix this up a little bit now that I did my concavity, and we're almost ready to do the scutes on the shell. Okay, so now I actually added a little bit of clay, wet my fingers. Always wet your fingers if you're going to touch the other side of the sculpture, because of course, you know, it's still sticky even as a mix, and you could tear the piece in the back, you know, and you'll have to start all over. So this is the kind of what I'm going for here, if I can get the camera to focus. right? And now just kind of blend in these areas. I'm going to use my soft tool for this as well. Soft tools are great because green stuff doesn't stick to it. But as you can see, I'm starting to define the belly shell. So by adding that tube of clay and then blending it in to the rest of the shell, you create this illusion of the, the sandwich. That's kind of what you want. I'm going to just use my ball tool and kind of continue to press down on this a little bit to make that illusion of a hole. We're going to leave that black when we paint it. Okay? So we're getting there. Getting there. Definitely getting there. Okay, so now I'm starting to think a little bit more about the details, right? And I'm starting to define some of these areas. Areas that will be bone, and now I'm working more with tools and working very, very, very carefully. If some areas, if I expose tinfoil on some areas, that's okay. I just very, very carefully, very slowly kind of cover those areas up. And this is the base of the arms, and so I start to define them a little bit. Now remember, I'm not going to do the legs or the arms yet. I'm going to let this dry, so I have to make sure that I'm happy with whatever's drying. If you see down there, I already began defining the tail, the tailbone, okay? Because again, if I'm going to let this dry, I have to make sure I'm really happy with it. And there are some fingerprint marks. That's inedible. I just go back with a little bit of water and smoothen it. Now another way to smoothen things is when you're working with these clays is you take, say, your soft tool and you just roll it. You use it as a rolling pin. Okay? And a lot of times you notice how all my tools are so dirty. I use the handle of the tool as a rolling pin as well. Okay? And that helps smoothen things. So I'm going to work a little bit on this before I do the scutes and then call it a day. Come back to it tomorrow. Okay, so I need to add a little bit more clay in order to cover up that space. Okay, so I started to define a clavicle bone. These are generally not exposed so much like this, but for my figure, that's the way I'm going to do it to kind of hit home, this is a skeletal creature. And so now I'm just kind of removing excess clay from some areas. One of the hard things about working with resin clay is that you can't use reduction tools like you can with polymer clay, right? And you have to resort to either using your X-Acto knife. You gotta use your X-Acto knife to kind of chop things up, right? If you want to cut things. So yeah, it makes things a little trickier because these clays are so gummy. But you can see I have a notch already in my lower shell here, right? And starting to define the clavicle bone here. This is part of the neck. Turtlenecks are actually in an S shape, and they have a weird shape. It's like a U shape here, and then another U shape, and it's kind of coiled in the shell. Of course, that makes sense, right? Because of the way turtles hide their heads. So, again, it's a pretty fascinating animal. Coming to think of it, All right, so I'm going to define some of the bones there. Not going to go into any detail. Just kind of define those bones a little bit, the neck bones. And so I'm going to work on that, and then almost ready. We're going to stop once we do all of these scutes. Okay, so what did I do here? Well, I switched to my X-Acto knife, and the X-Acto blade is excellent for sculpting with green stuff. I wet the blade a little bit. This was the tool I used initially. But then I go with my X-Acto knife and very carefully, it is a very sharp blade, so very carefully, I take my blade and I do this into the edges. That produces some nice little undulations along the edges. I also go and start defining my scutes on the other side, and if I need to like make the lines a little bit deeper so that the edges of the scutes are better defined, then I do it with my X-Acto blade. Now to do the rings inside, or well, semi-rings, they're kind of more like rectangles and squares and such. Again, very carefully, very slowly with the X-Acto knife. Now the edges I want to press in a little bit deeper, the edges of the scutes, and that's because I want my edges to be really defined and differentiated from the inner lines, right? And these are actual growth rings, just like on a tree, right? So, oops, sorry guys. So again, I'm going to do that for the center. Now in the center, it's the same principle. I go very lightly with the tip of the blade. You notice how this blade, is a little bit squarish in the front, right? It got a little bit chipped, and that's okay. That works great. Blade is still super sharp, so I'm going to be very careful and just do my little lines. I start with the outer line, and then I go in, you know, and start doing my little squares, close up the little rectangle there in the center. Okay, it's harder to do when viewing the camera. Okay, but that's basically the idea. And then I go back and I really define the edges to make sure that the edges of my scute are really defined. There's a lot of little tricks to repair things if you don't like the way they came out. But it can be tricky because sometimes the clay and clay mixes especially don't want to behave the way you want them to. So you got to be careful. All right, so I'm just doing the inner rings now, and that's gonna end my carapace real soon. And then I'll summarize it, and that'll be the end of this video. If I want to make the little ridges and make this a little bit more oval, that's fine. I can let this dry and do that once dry, and this way I don't destroy the details I already have. Now, I've already worked on some of the details here. I just got to do this side, and then notice I also worked on some of the details around the neck area, okay? So again, to get those that little undulating kind of shape of the shell, you gotta, sometimes I will pull the blade this way, right? And other times I will push in. So, and I go on the opposite side, and that will kind of shape your clay as you go. All right. So I'm going to go fix this up, and then we're going to wrap this video up. Okay, and I'm going to stop for today. Just a few minor fixes. But one thing I do is I go back with my X-Acto knife and really cut into these areas that I want to, the scutes to really show. And there's still a little bit more to do in that respect. Then I take my X-Acto knife and very gently make little scars, little lines, little indentations to give it a little roughness, a little bit of interest. I begin to define this other the edges here as well, and then do a little bit of roughness on the bridge here of the shell. Now while I'm working now, I'm running out of space to actually hold the piece. Here's the rear. You can see everything is kind of irregular, and that's what I want. If you want it straighter, maybe a younger turtle or something, you can always just work slower and kind of, you know, really shape out the scutes. This way was the fastest way, you know, cutting in. The other important thing is when you want really like almost like raised areas, one thing I do is I angle my blade and cut at an angle slowly, right? And then doing the same thing slowly with each of these rings. And then you get sort of a bit of a raised effect, right? It just raises the detail a little bit. I think this is the fastest way to make the scutes. But of course, it depends on what you want, you know? Now, before I go, I make sure this, again, is uncovered. Make sure everything is clear there. And then tomorrow, if I want to raise this a little more with some ridges, I can. I might just leave it like that. I don't know. But there it is. Undead Ninja Turtle coming to a tabletop near you. All right, I'm going to fix this a little bit. Thank you so much, guys. I'm sorry this video is so long. But that's the way it is with sculpting. So this has been a very cool project. All right, so we'll continue where we left off in the next video.